Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the little late start. We had technical difficulties, which are happening more than often than others. I am
Yeah.
formally calling this Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting to order on this Tuesday, May 3rd, about 1:37. We have a quorum of members in the chamber present. And we will start with number 1, which is approving minutes of the April 6th and April 14th, 2022 meeting. Those are in your packet. Okay, I have a motion by, I'm sorry, Commissioner Robinson, second by Commissioner Herbst. Any questions or concerns? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. And that motion passes unanimously. And now we're on number 2, Director's Report on Utility Operations.
Yeah, so did a list this month. If any commissioners have anything specific, you'll notice on the next agenda, item 3, that we're going to be talking about staffing shortages and some hiring challenges. And Tony with HR is here as well, but
Go ahead.
Under the industrial park forest main, I know it was successfully cleaned. I happened to be driving by there, so I stopped a few times. And then I talked to Mr. Brooks about it. So, but have we seen any change in the pump run times reflective of that at the industrial park lift station?
Yes, the initial pressures have dropped once the pumps engage and they're pumping. So, and the pressures have went down considerably in the forest main, or from the head pressure. So the clean was successful.
And I don't know if you said it in here, or we do see it someplace else, but are we buying the launching equipment so that we can do it in-house?
Yes, we did purchase the launcher itself,
Okay.
and it resides down at the industrial park lift station.
I have a couple other questions or comments.
Go ahead.
The summer aides, does anybody have any summer employees available?
No.
There was, I think, I don't know sure which office, maybe it came out of the clerk's office, but there was an appeal to see if poll workers would possibly, I think they're helping out with the distribution of the countertop units for filtration. Is that possible to do the same thing? I don't know what they're paid in relation. I'm a poll worker, but I don't have a clue what I'm paid. But I wonder if we could attract some retired folks, because those people are typically retired, and maybe help out. I don't know. At this point in time, I don't see you're going to be too successful to hire anybody to do those tasks, and we're very dependent on that.
yeah, I mean, I can talk to Tony and we can reach out to those individuals. Obviously, there's, some labor and stuff that's involved, and so they'd have to be aware of the type of work that they'd be doing. Yep, okay.
And I have a question for you. On page 45 in our packet, you talk about sometimes leaks and messes occur during startup of new equipment. Has that been taken care of or resolved? Or why is that happening?
Well, there's so much going on. There's bound to be some loose fittings on the contractor side. Sometimes they'll forget to tighten a fitting, and that's where the leaks are occurring.
Okay.
And that. So yes, those have been taken care of.
And the other thing, I just want to tell you that all the pictures in the packet were very, very wonderful and so informative. So I really appreciate looking at those. Thank you.
On the director's report, under wastewater, point 3, the last sentence, due to lack of knowledge of the equipment and the industry as a whole, is taking much longer to train new hires and the quantity and quality of work suffers. I'm not sure what that means. The knowledge of the equipment, is that the new equipment that's going into the remodeled plant? And industry as a whole, I don't know what that reference refers to. I mean, are we using equipment that no one else is using and we don't know how to run it?
I think what I meant by that comment is that the industry as a whole, being on the collection system side of things, I was referencing that on the collection systems technician.
All right,
Being, the equipment being referenced is like the vac trucks, the jetters, the flush trucks, sewer cameras, pretty much everything that
okay.
the collection system uses to do the
You're
work.
referring to new people coming online?
Correct.
Not having experience in these fields?
Correct.
Got it, thanks, Brian. Ben?
Yep.
Are there any other questions on the director's report? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 3, discussion and possible action related to staffing shortages and hiring challenges.
And so I put a memo together, kind of, from the staff perspective on what we're looking at doing. I know the commission's been very supportive of opening it up to apprenticeships, to other part-time workers to assist. I think one of the things from the staff perspective is we need to get to a point where we stabilize our workforce, with our full-time employees. And then I think that we'll be in a much better position to be able to initiate some of those or put in place some of those other initiatives. And I think right now we're not there. With the applications that came in, Tony had also put in front of you an update where we're at for water and sewer as well. Sewer still seems to be our largest challenge with continued 3 vacancies. Water department, we are hopeful that we will be getting 2 new distribution maintainers here out of this set of applicants. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, either of myself or HR.
How innovative have we been relative to our recruitment processes? And I understand, when you look around, everybody's facing the same problems. And, I'm thinking about, how are we with recruiting? We tend to have a male-dominated workforce. Have we reached out to other populations in an effort to try to attract them? And, I was participating in a seminar or webinar last week, and they said, 35% of the women that left the workforce during the pandemic haven't returned. So I think that there's a great potential pool of applicants if we think creatively and outside the box. How are we doing with minority populations? Are we tying into with projects like the Joseph's Project and other things relative to trying to be a little bit more innovative in how we're going out there? Because we're not in this alone, and we can't buy our way out of it, because as we buy our way out, other people buy their way out, and it just creates a step ladder. And so we have to give a little bit more thought to how we go about approaching our recruitment and who's in our pool, and what are our qualifications, how do we modify those, how do we accelerate training. I'm worried about burning out existing staff, which leads to the turnover. So I just encourage us to be as original as we can be, and innovative where appropriate, and begin to try to expand that pool and look at other opportunities to bring people into the workforce.
I appreciate that. I have had some conversations like with, not specifically with the Joseph Project, but also just looking at different alternatives to look at for individuals coming in. Some of them, depending on their backgrounds, we do need CDLs. Some of them will be unable to get those. And so those are some challenges that we will have as well. But I appreciate the insight. I think that and if we do, that might require some policy changes and things like that. But I think, I think hopefully that there are some opportunities out there that we can tap into.
Eric, maybe this has been talked about before, but just out of curiosity, would some of the employers that, or shouldn't employees that you have on board now, would it be possible that somewhere along the line, they might know of someone, or we could offer a bonus or something if they recruited somebody else and got them on board? Has that been something it's ever been discussed?
I guess we haven't thought about that, Don, you know, if somebody does bring somebody on board or anything like that, that's certainly something I can, you know, we can put on the table too.
I mean,
Yeah.
you've got employees that have been there quite some time, and obviously they enjoy what they're doing, and it would be nice then if they could come in and bring in somebody else that they could mentor,
Sure.
and we
Yeah.
could keep this going. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think Commissioner Forrest, were you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and-
Eric, in your report, you talk about the fact that our salaries are below similar wages based on AWA and Wisconsin Rural Water Studies. Do we know what Marshfield and Point and Eau Claire and Green Bay are paying for comparable positions? And I'm assuming we're behind those, but I don't have any numbers in front of me to be able to evaluate that. And then secondly, you talk about the 5 to 6 years between wage studies, and it appears that you're recommending that we increase or we shorten the time between wage studies. But again, I don't see any specific action here. Is something going to take place, or are we just talking about the situation and complaining about it?
Well, part of it is, you know, this is a staff's perception and recommendations on things that the commission should think about, right? Now, whether it's an actual wage study that gets shortened from 5 years to 3, or whatever that case may be, or maybe it's just different actions in between the wage studies. I know that this past year, I think, was really one of the first years we actually had you know, an adjustment, you know, to the market. And I think that the city council seemed amenable to, you know, look at those every year and potentially have those. I think that that would be a large benefit. One of the biggest things, you know, from my perspective, having the workforce that we have with over 100 employees in the department, was that when we finally got the wage study implemented and moved it forward, the recommendations were too expensive for the city to implement. And that's because that there weren't appropriate wage adjustments in between.
Yes.
And so, just kind of like with our rate structure,
Yes.
you know, like we do small incremental rate structure increases just to try to keep up, so that we don't have these large fluctuations when we finally go in for a rate case. And so, you know, I'm looking at the department and the workforce that we have and trying to understand moving forward, how do we not get in this same position again in another 5 to 6 years, you know? So, yeah.
But is it too much to ask that this commission have information so that we can actually compare apples to apples? Because we've talked about this for meeting after meeting after meeting, but I never see any specifics. Like, are we paying $22.50 an hour? Are we paying $18.50 an hour? I don't know. So I acknowledge that there's a problem,
Okay.
but I don't know how to respond because I don't have any specific information.
Right, and I've started preparing. I mean, when we look at surveys, you know, we're definitely below. When we look at other municipalities, we're definitely below. I would work with Tony to put those numbers together in comparisons, not only with the national surveys, but the state surveys, as well as, you know, other municipalities as far as the utility goes. Something that you can look at.
Just a second, I'm sorry. Mr. Jean, then, Mr. Robbins.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to get excited here or not, so I'm going to be careful. I'm going to ask Ben Brooks, first of all, what's the population of Medford where you were previously employed?
Approximately 4,500.
4,500, and your starting salary for comparable people there at the wastewater plant would be?
There was a base wage, introductory level, and then they had the ability to obtain their certifications. All operators there were at the advanced level with a state certification in the wastewater field. So that being said, with each subgrade they would obtain, they were allowed a certain amount, dollar amount per subgrade, up to I don't recall what it was, but it was added onto their base as they went successfully past the certification levels.
So if you hired somebody there, do you have an idea? I don't know what we would hire them here at, but you're,
I want to, if I, don't quote me, but I believe it was 24, 25 starting.
and what do we pay here? What are we offering?
22, I think.
Okay, there's a community of 4,500, we're a community of 40,000, and we can't match that or beat that? There's a lot at risk here, by the way. And not only, I'm pretty confident those are two of our best employees in the back there, we have to worry about retention. We can't expect them to stay here if they could go someplace else and make $2 or $3 an hour or whatever it might be. We have to address this. The fallout of not addressing this is we get DNR citing us for not operating that facility and maintaining that facility. And that's not good news. And on the drinking water side, we have the same potential fallout. We have to address this. And I think the simple thing is we hire with incentives and we treat our employees with incentives. It has to happen because we're not going to get there otherwise. All this other talk is just fluff. I can assure you it's fluff. I urge, I don't care who does it, we put a task force together immediately. And somebody, I would like the mayor to chair that, but we should have staff and we should have key department heads dealing with that. And if we have to do it throughout the whole city, I don't have a problem with that because it has to be addressed. I don't think we can, so I apologize if I got excited here, but this is scary. I know this is scary. And I went through this once when I first came here. And I wouldn't want it, I don't even want that black eye for the city of Wausau. We have to address it. Thank you.
You know, I agree with Joe on the need to address it, but I want to be cautious that we not as utility work independent of the city. I think it has to be consistent with what the city is doing. And we also have, I understand our problem, but I'm concerned about the ratepayers and our ability to support where we're at. We've got two projects that potentially could take us to the highest price utility in the state of Wisconsin. And if we start looking at other costs, we just need to be cognizant that there are other factors in play and we have to look at the rates. So I'm fully supportive of a study. It ought to be comprehensive. It ought to be, again, innovative. I think we have to look at how we're going to go about it, approving it. Are there some ways for us to streamline some of the functions? Are there ways for us to potentially have DPW work with us and share some of the landscaping and other activities during some of their slower times? I think we need to be innovative and look at it. I agree that if we've got new plants coming up, that it's critical that they be supported and we not burn the staff out, but we also have that financial prudency requirement for us going forward. So maybe that task force isn't a bad idea.
Eric, have these wonderful people that are sitting in the back row, have they ever given any input as to how they feel or what they think should be done or what should be handled, how much more they should earn? Have they ever been brought into the?
I don't know. There may have been some numbers and stuff thrown around, Don, but I think that, just over the last few years, I think that the overwhelming view that's come forward from our skilled labor force is that there's just been a lack of keeping up, and it's challenging, I think, for them. I think as you just look nationally, everything's going up, right? But their paychecks every year have been going down. And that's everything from healthcare just to expenses by themselves. And so the city itself, the utility is just not keeping up. And I think Joe hits on something that's very, very important with the utility. other than our employees, the water and sewer are probably the most important asset that the city has. And it is in jeopardy right now, as far as meeting compliance. And I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that moving through 2022. We may become full staff this year, but we have a lot of training to do. Our job descriptions, we have brought, requirements down a lot just to get people in the door to do interviews. And so anybody that we bring on is going to take a lot of training. Some of them even need to go through training now for CDLs. In the past, we haven't necessarily had to do that to an extensive time frame. And this will be time intensive. Once we do get fully staffed, we'll probably be 18 to 24 months out, because those people that come on cannot be on call right away. And so that burden is still on our existing employees to carry that on-call time.
If by chance we do form a task force, it has to happen fairly quickly. We can't wait. So I appreciate John's support of that. But we need to act in dispatch and get this thing done, because I agree with you on the rates, but it would be sad if we can't run these facilities. That would be sad. And I think our ratepayers are willing, and I think our taxpayers are willing to make sure that we have the funds to get those jobs done. Because if we fall down, they're really going to point the finger.
I've asked this before, and I may have forgotten the answer, but have we talked to NTC about this issue and about the need for new people coming in? We have this, in my view, we have this incredible technical knowledge, training, resource in our community. And I'm just wondering if there isn't a connection that we could make that would address some of the issues that we face in training, the CDL requirement that keeps coming up, in finding new employees, finding interns, finding apprentices. I don't know if any conversations have taken place with the correct people at NTC. That's my question. Or are we just still talking about it?
Actually, I could speak to that. The Human Resources Department has been consulting with NTC regarding meeting the CDL training requirement. And so they are in a position to help us as we begin to hire new employees without CDLs. They will likely go to NTC or another community partner for training, and then return for more on-the-job training. The water department is currently positioned to be the first department in the city that is going to be training hires for CDLs. So we are looking most likely to partner with NTC for that, although depending upon classroom availability and some other items, we do have some backup options available as well.
Well, that's a start. I'm glad to hear that. I just hope that that conversation would continue and would encompass other topics.
If I could answer Dawn's question, in regards to the supporting staff that you were referencing sitting out in the audience today, I know we hear it daily, Scott probably hears it daily too, of what they could be making elsewhere. They're dedicated employees. They show up to work daily. So they, like you said, they love what they do. So if we have to be their voice, we will, to bring things forward. And hopefully, Joe Jean, this task force idea is great. So I would second that.
And if I could just jump on behind Ben there a little bit. Some of our staff is very experienced, and they're the guys that we, and girls, that we trust to train our new employees. They're the reason we can lower our standards and bring people into the door and train people to do the work that we do without having the high cost of wages. But we do have to bring our wages up. We're backed into a corner where if a lot of these key people leave, we're not going to have anybody here to train the other people. I don't want to point out to the gentleman in the back, but they could both make $15 an hour more by walking out that door. We don't get applicants that can operate equipment. We don't get applicants that have CDLs anymore. We don't get applicants that work in trenches. It's just not work that young people are wanting to do. And to follow up on your request for the tech, most people that are going through electrical, mechanical, or some kind of engineering degree aren't going to come to work for a city for $22 an hour. It's, you know, you can't, like John said, you can't buy our way out of the hole, but you at least got to bring your wages up to be competitive.
Well, Scott, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying there's a resource there. And I'm hopeful that we would be using it to its maximum ability. Yes, we need to raise wages. Yes, Joe's task force idea is good. Yes, we need answers quickly. We've been kicking this around for a year. And, you know, as commissioners, we're not seeing any results, neither are you. So we need to address that. But you're going to continue to have a need for new people coming into the field. And even after you raise your wages, if we're able to do that, you're still going to need new people. You're going to have retiring people. You're going to have people moving on. You're going to have people leaving the job for whatever reason. You need replacements. So that's my only thought. Is turning to an educational resource that's here and seems to be thriving, and perhaps this is something they could help with. That's my only point.
Any more discussion, questions? Otherwise, we're moving on. We are doing a little switcheroo. We are going to go next with number 5, presentation and update on the progress and information to date regarding the PFAS pilot study.
Yeah, this, Susan's going to come up and kind of kick this one off.
Yeah. So in your council packet, you received our progress update. The pilot study continues to operate, and we're collecting samples, compiling and assessing the data. The equipment's operating as anticipated. We are seeing a reduction of PFAS across the test columns. But with a little bit more detail, my colleague Andrew Dow is on WebEx, and hopefully our audio is still working.
Yes, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Andrew. I'm going to turn it over to you now. We have the slides up. Hopefully you can see those. So Andrew is going to give you more information on the pilot study progress.
Okay, thanks, Susan. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the pilot study. If you can advance to the next slide, please. I'll explain a little bit more about the pilot setup and operation.
Okay, you're on the next slide, Andrew.
Thanks.
And if you just want to cue me when you want the slides advanced, I have the magic clicker thing.
Okay, great. Thanks. So on this first slide, we just wanted to provide a summary and a review of how the pilot study is set up and how it's operated in terms of sampling and what we're sampling. So in this case, the water supply to the pilot study is coming from the existing drinking water plant where the pilot system is set up. So the water is pre-treated in the existing plant full-scale process in the clarifiers and filters, and then a sample stream from the filters is distributed to 4 pilot scale columns that we have set up to look at the performance of different media. In the first column of the pilot, we have an anion exchange process that was designed for use at the new plant to remove organic matter, which we're measuring as total organic carbon, or TOC. We do expect some removal of PFAS with this resin, but with more limited selectivity compared to other media options that are available, and potentially with more variable effluent concentrations of PFAS due to how this process is operated for TOC. But regardless of the PFAS concentrations leaving that resin, we also recognize that it's a very effective pre-treatment step for other widely applied and commercially mature technologies for PFAS removal in drinking water. And those two technologies are represented in columns 2 and 3, which are granular activated carbon and a single-use PFAS selective ion exchange resin, respectively. So those columns are operated in series with the regenerable resin for TOC removal, simulating what could be a supplemental treatment process at the new plant. And then lastly, in column 4, we have the same single-use ion exchange resin that's used in column 3, but in this case operated in parallel with the first ion exchange process. In this case, we're collecting insight on the feasibility, performance, and potential disadvantages or limitations of using that single-use ion exchange resin as a substitute technology as opposed to a supplemental treatment technology. And the table on the right is a summary of the different samples that are collected from different points in the pilot system as it continues to operate, and the frequency of sampling for those different sample points as was agreed upon with the DNR. And then lastly, in the last column, we have a summary of the number of samples for which we've received PFAS results from the lab in Wisconsin that does the PFAS analysis for us. I'll just note that there is a 2 to 3 week delay between the time of sample collection generally and receiving a report of the results from the lab due to the time it takes them to process these samples and do the intricate analytical work required. You can go to the next slide, Susan.
Yep.
Before we talk about just the results that we've seen in the pilot to date, just wanted to provide an overview and a summary of the different chemicals that we're testing for when these samples are collected and submitted to the laboratory. So we're screening for a set of 33 different chemicals in the PFAS family that span a number of different categories based on their chemical structure. And you can see that a number of those chemicals or compounds, as indicated with an asterisk, are included in the Department of Health Services recommended enforcement standards for cycle 11. And then a subset of those are also have been detected to date in Wausau's water, either in the January results or in what we're seeing in samples from the pilot. The priority, so to speak, from a treatment standpoint in terms of reducing concentrations is largely the compounds that are noted with a double asterisk, which are included in the cycle 11 recommendations as part of a combined standard of 20 parts per trillion for the combined concentration of PFOA, PFOS, and then up to 4 precursor compounds that can be metabolized into PFOS in the body. And 3 of those 4 precursor compounds have also been detected in Wausau's waters. We're tracking the removal and presence of those throughout the pilot study. Go to the next slide. Here we have a qualitative summary of the results that we've received to date based on the sampling that's been done so far. Again, due to the delay in the turnaround for the analytical results, these results represent the first 3 to 4 months of pilot operation and sampling, and the pilot's been running now for about a month and a half.
Andrew, I think you meant the first 3 to 4 weeks, correct?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And it's been running for about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah, month and a half. Yep. And so one thing to note is that the filter effluent or the pilot supply water, with respect to that 20 part per trillion combined standard for PFOA, PFOS, and precursor compounds, has been consistently above 20 parts per trillion, which is consistent with the January 2022 sampling. We're seeing that the effluent from the first column using the regenerable ion exchange process that was designed for use in the new plant. To date, in the results we've received, the PFAS concentrations of those 6 compounds, the combined concentration has been remained below 20 parts per trillion thus far. However, the concentrations have not been consistently non-detect or below the detection limit. There has been some detection of certain compounds above the detection limit. And then in the effluent from columns 2, 3, and 4, we've seen to date non-detectable levels of all 33 PFAS compounds. And then we're tracking a number of other parameters, but one of the things that we're highlighting here is what we're observing with differential pressure across the columns, which is sort of an indication of how the columns would operate, energy requirements, what's going on potentially in terms of fouling of the media. And while we've noted that the single-use ion exchange resin that's operated without pretreatment for THC removal is to date removing all of the PFAS compounds to below the detection limit, we've seen much higher differential pressure in that column. And so we'll continue to look at that data and review it with technical advisors, including the resin supplier, and make a determination about what the implications are. But we do suspect that that's reflective of some degree of organic fouling because we're not removing the total organic carbon like we are for columns 2 and 3 by using the anion exchange process designed for the new plant. And then the last item that we wanted to highlight is just some other work that's gone on related to the PFAS response, but in parallel with the pilot testing. Understanding that there's a desire and interest to explore a variety of solutions and understand solutions that might be feasible to implement quickly to reduce exposure to PFAS in the drinking water. We've done some exploratory bench testing with powdered activated carbon as another potential treatment strategy. In this case, in contrast to the technologies that we're pilot testing, which are more polishing technologies at the back end of the plant, the powdered activated carbon is added at the front of the treatment process, and the PFAS are absorbed onto the carbon particles that then settle out in the clarifier and are sent with the water plant sludge in this case, to the wastewater plant collection system and disposed of in that manner. And so as a potential interim or temporary response strategy, this does present a few advantages, including relatively low capital investment because of the limited scope of new equipment required and the potential for expedited implementation, largely for the same reasons. So it has the potential to serve as an interim strategy to reduce PFAS concentrations in the entire water supply while the city continues to determine the preferred long-term strategy and decide what investment to make in that. But there are some uncertainties and disadvantages that are being further explored and discussed with Wisconsin DNR engineering staff, most of which are related to the fact that the PFAS that's removed at the water plant will end up going to the wastewater plant and would end up in the biosolids and having an impact on PFAS concentrations in the biosolids there. So we'll continue to have some discussions with DNR about how we can continue to explore this alternative. This graph here is just a summary of the bench test screening results that we saw, where we used jar testing to simulate the treatment process at the new drinking water plant, including like coagulation, flocculation, and settling, and then tested 3 different doses of powdered activated carbon and 3 different powdered activated carbon samples just to understand what the dose response would be. And we did see that at these various doses, there was a reduction in the concentration of these 3 PFAS compounds shown here, as well as some others that were tested for and aren't shown on this particular graph. And we did see that the reduction in PFAS increased with increasing dose. So that just provided some context or a framework for what kind of carbon usage rates would be required to achieve a given reduction for PFAS. And before implementing this or pursuing this strategy further, some additional testing would be warranted to repeat these results and better define the dose response. And you can go to the next slide. So we just wanted to conclude with a summary of next steps as we see it for this process. So we would continue operating a pilot study through May and potentially beyond that. The purpose of that would be largely to collect more information about the PFAS performance with the regenerable ion exchange process that is designed for the new facility, and then continue to collect information relevant to potential interim strategies at the new plant that could involve installation of supplemental ion exchange or GAC treatment. And that would certainly be relevant to more permanent or long-term strategies as well. And we'll continue to, we look forward to reviewing the information and collaborating with the Wood team as that moves forward as well. And then we're planning to prepare an update with the utility staff for the commission in June that will present options for full-scale treatment strategies, both interim and permanent strategies at the new drinking water facility, with the goal of providing more information on how those options would be implemented, some cost perspective for those relevant options, and schedule perspective. So that's what we had prepared for an update on the pilot study and the related evaluation of PFAS response strategies. And we'd be glad to answer any questions if you have them at this time.
Go ahead, Mr. Robbins.
So are we looking at bed volumes in volume when we're flowing through, and how effective those are based on volume of water going through? So is that part of the pilot project? When will you have, in other words, when will we see breakthrough? Because there's only so much assimilative capacity for any media, whether it's the resins or the carbon. So are you evaluating breakthrough or volume?
Yes, thanks for the question, Mr. Robinson. Yeah, we are tracking the volume that we're treating through each column as the pilot study operates. So when we get a sample, when we get results for a given sample, we'll know how many bed volumes were treated at that time, and that will allow us to quantify, the bed volume that at which we see breakthrough, or we see concentrations of certain PFAS compounds appear. And so far, we're only seeing detectable PFAS concentrations in the effluent from column 1. And then we'll have to see if we see any breakthrough in the time that's available from the other columns as well. But we'll have the data to quantify that.
And then a follow-up question, are we studying the chemistry of the post-treatment water to see how that might impact corrosive control measures and other factors in our system?
Yes, thanks for the question. We are collecting data on certain inorganic parameters that are intended to address those questions. So we're measuring sulfate and chloride concentrations, as well as alkalinity in samples from some of these streams, so that we can make some assessments about corrosion control treatment impacts. And then we're planning to get some more input from the ongoing study for corrosion control treatment that's taking place with the water utility now as well.
And then finally, are we doing, as part of the cost analysis, are we doing life cycle, including disposal and permanent treatment as part of that study?
Yes, absolutely. We are looking at capital costs for construction at the new plant and operating costs and life cycle costs based on things like media replacement, as well as disposal of the spent media and any other waste handling implications.
Mr.
Have you estimated, in the use of powdered carbon, have you estimated what the increase in solids handling costs would be at the wastewater plant? I know there'll be an impact on the PFAS content of the biosolids. But are there any cost numbers that you've come up with, even if that's just an interim solution?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Forts. We have not quantified a cost impact at the wastewater plant at this time, but we have had some discussions with their engineers who've been working on the upgrades at the wastewater plant, and they did indicate that they feel there's sufficient capacity with the solids handling infrastructure there to accommodate the quantities of additional residuals from the water plant that we would be looking at in this scenario, but we haven't quantified any cost impacts at this time.
And then one final question. Are you aware of any technologies for regenerating spent powdered carbon?
I am not aware of any technologies for reactivating or reusing and regenerating powdered activated carbon, no.
Thank you.
I think you answered the question quite well under PAC, but I'm not sure everybody understands how you would dispose of GAC or reuse it and the resins. Can you go over that? And also, what is the detection limit of the PFAS products?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mr. Dan. Let me answer the last question first. The detection limit for the different compounds or PFAS that we're testing for varies a little bit depending on the specific chemical or analyte, but generally it's on the order of 2 parts per trillion or 2 nanograms per liter, plus or minus. And then regarding the powdered carbon waste versus GAC and ion exchange, yes, the advantage with the GAC or ion exchange that are in a fixed bed in a pressure vessel, and they're essentially a fixed bed treatment, is that when that media is spent in terms of its capacity to remove the PFAS to sufficiently low concentrations, then it can be hauled away for subsequent handling or disposal. In the case of the GAC, there are opportunities to thermally reactivate it at high temperature and then reuse it. But in the case of ion exchange, it's essentially going to a landfill or an incinerator. But with the powdered activated carbon, all of the PFAS-laden waste, so to speak, which is the powdered carbon, that ends up in the sludge or the residuals from the water plant. And in this case, would go to the wastewater treatment facility.
Oh, go ahead.
Not necessarily a question to Andrew, but recently we saw television reports on the PFAS content, I believe, of the wells in Weston going down for some reason. Have we been testing our wells on a regular basis to see if those numbers we saw in February have changed at all?
Sure, please.
We have not done the raw water through the wells. What we're doing is getting combined samples at the pilot. So what we're getting at the pilot is what we're going to be going into distribution. Those numbers haven't varied much, so we're not expecting that we'd have any big variances in our well supply.
Any other questions or concerns? Otherwise, thank you for the update. Sounds promising.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to our switcheroo and go back to number 4, discussion and possible action on a scope of services and necessary budget modification for hiring Wood Environmental and Infrastructure, Inc.
Yeah, thank you. The scope of services that was prepared by Wood is in your packets. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. I think they did a pretty good job highlighting the tasks 1 through 5, along with some other details. You will see in task order number 2, which is really the column testing and kind of some of the lab work that we don't have a cost yet because we haven't really scoped that out yet. So The total cost that they're proposing right now for the other 4 tasks is about $83,000. And then I just want to point out that task 2, once that scope gets prepared and exactly what that column testing will be, those will be additional costs as well, yeah, for sampling as well. And we've been paying for all the sampling in-house and being billed directly to save on any markups that we can, as we're moving forward, so. Evan is here with Wood, if any of the commissioners have any questions of them on the scope of services. Staff was pleased with the scope of services, and we would recommend that we move forward with this for our recommendation.
So Eric, are there triggers for some of the tasks? My understanding is that DNR was going to try to provide some of that background in the investigation into potentially responsible parties. Are we, I've had some conversations, I don't know where that is in the process, but, if we can get them to do that, that would be helpful. I think I understand that they're not going to help us should we want to go to litigation as the source, but what are the triggers that would move us into certain tasks?
Well, I think like task 1, right?
Right.
The technical input as we move forward with that, that's going to start immediately. And then we'll scope out the column testing based on what the engineers and Wood and staff feel like. So engineering evaluation peer review, I don't know, Evan, if you have an idea of how these things would get triggered specifically, because I know the process will evolve, John, as we move through, so. Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, so I think the vision would be that tasks 1 and 3 are things that we could conduct immediately or begin. There's immediate value to be had from those. Tasks 4 and 5 are things that can come at a later date. Task 5 is about risk communication and outreach. That is something that value can be pulled from immediately as well. So if that's something you guys feel would be valuable, we can start that immediately as well.
Follow-up, specifically as it relates to item or task 5, we've got a budget amendment for communication services with Mueller Communications, and I know Donahue is doing some outreach, and we've got Wood. What are we doing to avoid redundancy, overlap, duplication? And do we, from a risk communication perspective, you're doing some things, DHS is doing some things, DNR is doing some things. How many people are stirring the pot, and what mechanisms do we have in place to make sure that we've got one message and not a lot of redundancy in that process?
And I would echo John's concern. I had the same question. We're being asked to approve a budget for Mueller Communications for basically risk communications and public outreach. And then we have Wood proposing, or part of the Wood proposal would cover the same, in my view, the same task. So
Yeah,
asking that question.
I appreciate the question because I think there does need to be some clarity there. So the Mueller Communications team was initiated, in early February when kind of this first kind of hit the news media. What we would like to do as staff is we would like to pull back from them and really have this communication come out specifically with Wood engineers and Wausau Waterworks staff. And I think right now, the Mueller Communications is we have some expenditures that were initiated that we need to pay for. Initially, they were going to be paid out of the attorney's budget, but it seemed more practical that they would be, strictly from the utility. And then I know the mayor's been working with them, I think, for the next probably week or two to finalize some communications, and then we would transition over to Wood. And kind of start working with their communication team. Because I think that the information is going to become more technical, and we need the ability to explain it to the general public in a more formidable manner. I think that they can understand, so.
With regard to, since there's no budget there, under task 2, column testing, so how do we don't create a situation where duplicating? I know it's a rapid test versus the more standard pilot testing, but how do we minimize that so we're not creating extra expense?
Yeah, I think I'd actually hand that over to Bill. Bill leads our column test and treatability lab in Cambridge, Ontario.
Sure. Sorry, I was just unmuting and getting my video going. Yeah, so I think, one of the key things that we want to understand is what are we trying to achieve with the rapid scale testing? And we want to work with Wausau on that to make sure that it's going to give valuable information. So it's not a situation where we're trying to maximize the number of tests that are being done. We've got an idea of what the first test would cost and sort of what subsequent tests would cost. But what we need to do is make sure that we're bringing value around those tests, and we're not just doing them for what would be a more academic purposes, but they're actual purposes that are going to be of value to Wausau. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful. It's hard to say because we don't really know exactly what the plan is for that rapid scale testing at this point. Rapid scale testing is typically done to be able to understand breakthrough more thoroughly. Your pilot test, I believe, at least what I've seen in the past on pilot tests, is that you will see a very long bed life for those beds, and you won't get a good idea of how some of the longer chain PFAS compounds will break through. So rapid scale testing will give you a better sense for that. And it's applicable, it's well applicable to granular activated carbon, but how we use that and whether we do use it or not for ion exchange resin is a point of discussion that we need to have with the some of the folks at Wausau on the engineering side.
If and that was my request of why we moved the previous report submitted to the commission so that we better understand where we stood at this point. But it seems to me if the PAC can be used, that gets us under, I kind of got the impression it would get us under the 20. I know the fallout is that waste has to go to the wastewater plant, but that buys us, once we get, first of all, we have achieved what we told the public we were going to do. We were going to deliver water at startup that was below 20 parts per trillion, And time isn't so critical to us once we get to that point, other than for Mr. Brooks to deal with it. But it gives us more time to figure out precisely what we need to do in the long term at the water treatment plant. Maybe we need the rapid columns, but I'd like time I don't like to waste money. So I appreciate that we don't do redundant things that we don't need to do. Testing is very expensive. I think it's $300 to $500, whatever it is, I've heard. And every time we've got a column, you're generating a $300 expense just to look at it, windows of time. So thank you for.
I mean, I agree that doing testing for the sake of testing doesn't make sense, and it needs to be justified. So yeah, I'm aligned in that thought process.
So just from a logistics perspective, a question directed toward Eric on task 2. Obviously, there's no value in that task. The assumption is it comes back to this commission for a change order or an amendment at that time?
Yeah, you'll have to approve a budget for that once we have that. So, it might be though, John, like if, rather than just holding a special meeting or something, if you authorize the 83,000 today, right? We would have that ability, to initiate that bench testing if we had to, and then bring back, at the next meeting to actually get that additional cost in the overall contract with Wood.
And I just want to following up on Commissioner Gian's comment, I do want to be careful that we not create other problems for us relative to biosolids. And if we move that effluent to the wastewater plant and we increase significantly our PFAS and biosolids, we potentially incur ongoing liability associated with it. So we need to look at where we are holistically in our system. If it's flowing in, it's going out. If it's going out and we're pulling it out and we're land spreading it, what is that going to do relative to the classification of our waste? We have to be a little bit sensitive to that. I'd hate to jeopardize any categorization or I don't know what the right term is, Class A, for our biosolids based on PFAS content going forward. So just keep that in mind. With that, how are we paying for this? Do we have a fund?
We do. It's been set up. The anticipation is that once the DNR comes out with their criteria through the build infrastructure, or the bipartisan infrastructure bill through the DNR forgivable loan, that we would be able to request reimbursement. You'll see a couple resolutions on the agenda as well for us to do that, so.
So I remember the DNR's External Advisory Committee on PFAS, or PFAS External Advisory Committee, and we had a presentation last week, and I think there is some concern about how quickly they'll run the clean water and the drinking water programs through. There may be a supplemental process later in the year outside of the normal frame. So do we have the ability to cash flow that on the interim basis?
Yes.
All right. So with that in mind, I would move that we authorize a total, or not to exceed $83,343 for wood and be apprised on a regular basis of where we are relative to the status of the tasks.
Okay, for a second, go ahead, Mr. Jean.
I agree with Mr. Robinson regarding not creating another problem. However, first of all, the DNR is probably going to approve this process, I would guess. And number two, where do you think it's going now? Thank you.
Okay. Well, we do have a motion and a second to approve the 83,000 plus. Any other conversation, questions? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
We are now on number 6, discussion and possible action on a reimbursement resolution for expenditure of funds related to PFAS engineering and investigation through the WDNR Safe Drinking Water Loan Program.
So this is the resolution that I was just speaking about, and this would need to be on file for us, so when we do apply for that forgivable loan, that we could apply to have these engineering services reimbursed to us through that same program.
I'd move to approve.
We have a motion by Jean, second by Robinson. Any other discussion about this? Sounds good. All in favor say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. Okay. Number 7, discussion and possible action on a resolution designating an authorized representative to file for financial assistance from the State of Wisconsin Environmental Improvement Fund.
Again, once those funds become available, we need to have somebody designated under resolution, and that would be the mayor for the city to apply for those funds under that program for the forgivable loan for emerging contaminants.
I'll move.
Okay. Motion by Robinson, second by Herbst. Any questions, concerns? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Aye as well. That passes unanimously. Number 8, discussion and possible action on a budget modification and setting a budget amount for communication services from Euler Communications.
So we did tap into this a little bit. I would propose a budget of up to $25,000. There's some invoices in here. And I didn't get a full value of where they're at right now, but I would anticipate that the communications that they're preparing right now would be as far as that we would go with them. We would share those with our engineers and Mueller and kind of work with those communications and expand on those.
Go ahead, Mr. Forst first. Thank you.
Yeah, most of the invoices are for administrative services not specified specifically. There is a summary of services further on in the packet dated April 20th. And it lists frequently asked questions, an inquiry guide, newsletter content, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not aware of any specific impact from this firm on what we've been doing, but I may just be missing it. Is there someone here who is aware of the media statements, the website content, the draft responses from members of the public, et cetera, and whether those have been effective? I'm certainly willing to pay for quality service, but I don't see any evidence of it.
Yeah, I haven't really been involved with that, Jim, so I can't answer that specifically. Most of this has been through the mayor's office. I do know that they helped with in the newsletter, I believe, put some information together. There has recently been I think like a fact sheet that's put together that I've had some comments on over the past week, and I believe that that's part of what they're referencing as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
So do we have a contract with them right now for services? An engagement letter, and that engagement letter is for what amount? Well, I guess
Go ahead.
I share some of the concerns that Jim has, but I know that they've been providing services, but I'm glad that we're phasing them out. And I think we probably have some obligations based upon that engagement letter that we need to cover. And if you think, is 20,000 adequate, 25,000?
Like I said, I don't know exactly where they're at right now. I don't know. These are the invoices that I received that I think came through your office, correct, Dan?
Yes.
This is everything we've received to date.
Our obligation wouldn't be dictated as much by the engagement letter as it would be by the services already incurred. So we are obligated to pay for the work already performed, I guess is a better way to put it. So we require an engagement letter if we believe the services will exceed $1,000. So the initial, the mayor had the authority under a procurement policy to procure services up to $5,000. The League of Wisconsin Municipalities has an engagement letter or some kind of contract with Mueller Communications for all of their member municipalities. So we got the first $500 free by signing a letter with the league. And then after that, they started billing us on an hourly basis. I believe it might have been at $250 an hour, but it's close to that. Don't quote me on that. So we got one invoice for just a little over $1,000, and then this last invoice came in for $14,000. Those are the only two we've received. That's going to cover the bulk of it. We asked them how much more they thought they would want to be involved in terms of managing this as an emerging crisis, which I believe we may be out of that phase based on their experience handling PFAS issues for other municipalities, and to give us an estimated budget to the best of their ability, and that's when they provided an estimated budget of $10,000. We have weekly calls with them that last about an hour, the mayor and Eric and I from 11 to 12. Other than that, they're monitoring all of our media in the area surrounding this topic and providing suggestions to us and preparing these communications.
Mr.
I would move we cap the amount at 20,000. The invoices add up to about 16, I think, at the moment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to cap Mueller budget at $20,000. Any other further discussion? Okay, if not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. It looks like the end of the agenda, and so I don't know what you guys do, but I'm going to take a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Robinson, second by Hertz. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Thank you.